Sailing Right Behind, a Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Amine. The link to this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. It wasn't a weekend where Peter was scheduled to come to the compound, which is why it came as a shock to Tony when he got a text from Peter asking him to pick him up. Friday confirmed that he hadn't sustained any Spider-Man related injuries, but it still concerned Tony all the same. Rather than send Happy, he made the drive himself to get Peter from school. On any other day when he picked Peter up, Peter might casually look back at the astonished students in smug confirmation that yes, he did know Tony Stark well enough to be picked up by him from school, but there was none of that day. Peter just got up from where he was sitting, climbed into the passenger seat without a word, not even an infectiously cheerful, "Hi, Mr. Stark," or even any eye contact. Peter put on his seatbelt and propped up his elbow against the window, with a sour expression on his face. Tony clicked his tongue. "You gonna tell me what's going on, kid?" Peter didn't even turn to look at him and just shook his head. "Can we go to the compound, please?" That made Tony's eyebrows raise. "Does May know?" Peter flinched at that, and his expression soured further. "Please?" Tony considered taking Peter directly home, because he had no love for lying to May Parker. But Peter just looked so miserable, Tony sighed and pulled away from the school. The trip upstate was made in uncomfortable silence, with Peter brooding in the passenger seat and Tony occasionally looking over to see if anything had changed. He was used to Peter chatting his ear off about school or decathlon or whatever he and Ned were up to, or his exploits as Spider-Man. Silence was unheard of for Peter Parker. Still, Tony didn't try and prod for answers until they were in the compound and Peter tried to make a beeline for his room. Tony jogged in to get in front of Peter and cross his arms. "I think I should know why I had to take all that time to get you when it's not your weekend." "Can we talk about it later?" Peter scowled and tried to duck out of the way, but Tony stood, firm, blocking his way. "Nope, I get to know what's going on, or I'll be giving your lovely aunt a call." Peter's head shot up at that, and waved his hands with wide eyes. No, don't call May, please." Tony sighed and gestured for Peter to continue. "So?" At first, it seemed like Peter was going to argue more, but then his shoulders slumped and he sighed. I failed my genetics test." Tony blinked and lowered his arms to his side. "Is that it?" Peter's eyes widened again. "What do you mean, is that it? I didn't just fail, I got a 20%. I've never failed a test before. The worst I got was a B, and Ben literally had to drag me out of bed because I was so upset about it. But there was a string of robberies in Queens, and I, Spider-Man, had to go out and stop them, and I just put off studying because I thought it'd be okay, but..." Peter bit his lip as he cut himself off, and Tony could see the same lip was trembling. He sighed and gestured for Peter to follow him to one of the couches, where they sat down. He could understand how Peter felt. Failure was a tough pill to swallow, even tougher when you'd never had to deal with it before. "I bet May would be happy to comfort you in your time of need. Why hide out here?" "I don't want May to know." He stared down at his hand in his lap, which he was wringing in obvious distress. He was still biting at his lip, and Tony wondered how long he'd be able to hold out. "Why not?" Peter closed his eyes and let out a shuddering sigh. "Because she thinks I'm the smartest person alive. She works so hard so I can go to Midtown Tech, and I know about the money her and Ben put aside, so I wouldn't have to worry much about money when I go to college. But I'm a failure. She put so much faith in me, and I failed." Tony knew very well of what May had put herself through, so Peter could have all the opportunities in the world. And she was extremely stubborn about bearing that burden herself. Tony had insisted on letters of recommendation and paying for at least a portion of Peter's post-secondary schooling through his inevitable doctorate, but high school tuition was off limits. He also knew that Peter was the light of her life, and he could never let her down with something that was ultimately trivial in the grand scheme of things. The same could be said for him, after all. "It's just one test, kid. It's not the end of the world." He reached down to put a hand on Peter's shoulder, feeling him stiffen under the touch. That finally triggered a sob, which Peter immediately swallowed down. "It sure feels like it." That was enough for Tony to drop the pretenses. He shifted down so he could wrap one arm around Peter and pull him into a hug. "You're not a failure, Peter. You're the greatest kid who's going to grow into the greatest adult. And May is going to be so proud of you and think you're the smartest person alive no matter what you do." He paused, and Peter let out a shuddering breath as he bent down to press a kiss to the top of Peter's head. "And you better believe I'm going to be smug as hell when you're changing the world for the better, and I can say that I know you." Peter let out a laugh at that, but it quickly dissolved into sobs that racked his body as he buried his face into Tony's chest and just clung on tight enough that it didn't hurt. They could address how to better balance Spider-Man and schoolwork later, and he could make up an excuse as to why Peter came to the compound instead of going home, and all those other things didn't really matter at the moment. What mattered was that Peter needed him. He could oblige by holding him close and running a hand through his hair while assuring him that it wasn't just Spider-Man he supported without a thought. And if Peter mumbled an exhausted "thanks, Dad" when he was finally finished, Tony wouldn't tell.